Giulia Tofana, the Poison Queen of Italy. Born around 1620 in Palermo, Sicily, an island off the southwestern coast of Italy, long known for its mafia corruption, Giulia Tofana learned her craft of making agua tofana from her mother, Tofana d'Adamo, the later executed on July 12, 1633, for poisoning her own husband. Carrying on the family tradition, Giulia and her understudy daughter, Girolama Spara, moved first to Naples and later to Rome to escape mounting suspicions by local authorities, setting up a network of apothecary shops to sell legitimate anti-aging cosmetics for women, while under the table, they sold agua tofana for wives trapped in abusive or loveless marriages. In 17th century Italy, men were afforded unlimited rule over women, who in turn suffered untold abuses by their husbands due to a woman's lack of standing in society and scant opportunities to better their situation without a man. Short on options, women could marry and hope for the best, that their choice was a kind and loving man, while many abused women of the wealthier class sometimes turned to Giulia's apothecary shop for a much more lethal tincture to hide amongst her many lotions and creams positioned on her nightstand or vanity. Oftentimes labeled as manna of St. Nicholas of Bari, which was a popular healing ointment meant to treat blemishes, agua tofana was a blend of lead, arsenic, and belladonna that was odorless, tasteless, and virtually undetectable, making many women wealthy widows in the wake of their matricidal application of agua tofana, with some sources pinning the death toll at 600 lives. Steeped in mystery, urban folklore, and possible embellishment, Giulia Tofana worked in close alliance with her daughter and a group of trusted associates, one purported to be a Catholic priest. According to some sources, Giulia's business thrived in Rome for more than 2 decades until she was sold out by a woman who added agua tofana to her husband's soup. As the story goes, the woman later pointed the finger at Giulia after she confessed her crime during an interrogation by local authorities. A second version of Giulia's death tells of her apprehension in Rome before she and her daughter were executed upon their forced confession, while a third version supported by most credible historians points to her death by natural causes in 1651, before anyone was aware of her murderous enterprise, making the life of Giulia Tofana a masterful femme fatale of 17th century Europe. The Rosewood Massacre. Originally settled in 1845 by both black and white Americans alike, African Americans in Rosewood, Florida, would suffer the same black codes and Jim Crow segregation laws as any other post-Civil War blacks in the southern U.S. After most whites in Rosewood moved to nearby Sumner by the 1890s, on New Year's Day 1923, 22-year-old Fannie Taylor claimed she was assaulted in her home by a black man, and when Sheriff Walker did little to find the perpetrator, Fannie's outraged husband gathered a white mob to hunt down the suspect. In response, white haters from Gainesville, including about 500 Ku Klux Klan members, descended on Rosewood, where law enforcement told them that a black prisoner named Jesse Hunter had escaped a chain gang, which set the mob in search of the missing prisoner. Convinced that Jesse Hunter was being hidden by Rosewood blacks, they forced Aaron Carrier out of his house, dragged him to Sumner behind a car, where he was cut loose and beaten to only inches of his life. When blacksmith Sam Carter confessed under duress that he had hidden the prisoner in some nearby woods, the mob shot him and hung him from a tree when he failed to produce the convict. After Sarah Carrier hid some 25 frightened black children in her house, she and her son were killed by white racists, which later set the mob to destroying Rosewood one home and business at a time. As the town burned to the ground, Many surviving blacks hid themselves over the next few days in nearby swamps until Sarah Carrier's surviving son, James, led them to safety. For his alleged interference in helping his frightened brethren, the last of the white mob forced the Good Samaritan to dig his own grave before they murdered him. After Florida Governor Cary Hardy offered to send in the National Guard to restore order, Sheriff Walker declined the help, and while the white haters began to disperse, a group returned on January 7th to burn what little remained of the town. A special prosecutor and grand jury were appointed by Hardy to investigate, but after some 30 mostly white witnesses had testified, the jury was released after the prosecutor failed to find enough evidence for criminal prosecution. The surviving African Americans of Rosewood never returned after the killing spree and the destruction of their homes and businesses, making the Rosewood Massacre yet another stain in the South's long history of racial injustice. Leopold and Loeb. Known collectively in American history as Leopold and Loeb, Nathan Leopold Jr. and Richard Loeb both possessed extreme intelligence, and when the duo became friends at the University of Chicago, their mutual interest in crime hatched a belief that their superior minds would allow them to commit and get away with a perfectly executed and quite sensational crime. On the afternoon of May 21, 1924, Leopold rented a car under an assumed name, and as the duo cruised their wealthy childhood neighborhood in Chicago, they offered 14-year-old Bobby Franks a ride home. Instead, Loeb killed Franks with a chisel, driving 25 miles to Hammond, Indiana, before stripping off Frank's clothing in a culvert and pouring hydrochloric acid on the dead boy's face and genitals. After they burned their own blood-stained clothing and cleaned up the interior of the rental car, they typed 2 ransom notes to Frank's parents before destroying the typewriter and ditching it in the Jackson Park Lagoon. Before the Franks family could respond to the ransom demands, Bobby Frank's body was discovered in Hammond, along with a pair of eyeglasses found near Frank's body, with an unusual hinge configuration purchased by only 3 customers in Chicago, one of whom was Leopold. Brought in for questioning, Leopold suggested that he lost the glasses during a birdwatching trip the previous weekend, and when Leopold and Loeb claimed that they had picked up 2 women in the Leopold family car the night of Frank's murder, their alibi collapsed when the wife of the Leopold family chauffeur confirmed that the car was parked in the Leopold's garage the night of the murder. The duo's case further eroded when the destroyed typewriter was recovered on June 7th, leading to confessions by both young men that they had killed Bobby Franks to satisfy their Ubermenschen or Superman delusions about committing a perfect crime. Quickly devolving into a media circus trial of the century, Loeb's family hired famed criminal defense attorney Clarence Darrow, paying him $70,000, or $1.2 million in today's currency, for the defense of their son. Despite Leopold and Loeb's confessions of guilt, the trial would span 32 days, including over 100 expert witnesses and a 12-hour speech by Darrow opposing the death sentence for his doomed clients. On September 10, 1924, Cook County Circuit Court Judge John R. Caverly accepted Darrow's guilty pleas for Leopold and Loeb, sentencing them to life in prison for murder, plus an additional 99 years for kidnapping. Loeb was killed by a fellow inmate on January 28, 1936, while Leopold was paroled in March of 1958, spending the rest of his life in Puerto Rico before passing away from a heart attack in 1971, making Leopold and Loeb an eye-opening footnote in the annals of American crime. Emmett Till. Born in 1941, Chicago, Illinois, to a single mother who by all accounts was a hard-working and quite extraordinary woman. When Emmett Till was just 14 years old, he traveled to Money, Mississippi to visit his great-uncle Moses Wright. 3 days after his arrival, on August 24, 1955, Emmett and a group of teenagers entered Bryant's grocery and meat market after a long and hot day of picking cotton. Emmett purchased some bubble gum, while some of his buddies later reported that he either whistled at, flirted with, or touched the hand of Carolyn Bryant, the cashier and wife of business owner Roy Bryant. 4 days later, at 2:30 a.m. on August 28th, Roy Bryant and his half-brother, J.W. Millam, kidnapped Emmett from Wright's home, beating the teenager without mercy. After they shot him in the head, they used barbed wire to tie Emmett's mangled body to a large metal fan, dumping him unceremoniously into the Tallahatchie River. When Emmett's unconsolable mother shipped her son's body home to Chicago, she insisted on a 5-day open casket viewing, in her words, to let the world see what has happened. 2 black publications, Jet Magazine and the Chicago Defender, published graphic images of Emmett's mangled corpse, igniting a tidal wave of outrage and indignation throughout a horrified nation. At a time when black people and women were barred from jury duty, Bryant and Millam were tried for murder before an all-white, all-male jury, and despite graphic testimony by Moses Wright, one of the earliest cases of a black person openly accusing a white man in a court of law, despite overwhelming evidence of the defendant's guilt, on September 23rd, the jurors acquitted Bryant and Millam after a mere 67 minutes of deliberation. A few months later, in return for a $4,000 payday from Look magazine, Bryant and Millam openly admitted their guilt in the murder of Emmett Lewis Till. Despite the blatant injustice of Emmett's death and his white murderer's escape from retribution, Emmett's death sparked an early ignition point in the American civil rights movement of the late 1950s and 60s, propelling leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X to the height of a nation's shameful look at its white-inspired segregationist behavior. 50 years after Emmett's wrongful murder, 72-year-old Carolyn Bryant Donham recanted parts of her testimony from her husband's trial, admitting to author Timothy B. Tyson that nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. Her confession that Emmett never grabbed or sexually harassed her remained dormant for another 10 years, until the book's eventual publication in 2017, making the death of Emmett Till a tragic and early flashpoint in a nation's slow embrace of racial equality. Jimmy Hoffa. Born in 1913 Indiana, after Jimmy Hoffa's coal miner father passed away when Hoffa was still a young boy, his mother moved her 4 children to Detroit in search of employment opportunities, leading young Hoffa to drop out of school early to work a grocery store loading dock, where he organized his first labor strike to land he and his co-workers a better contract. Joining the International Brotherhood of Teamsters in the 1930s, his ambition and tenacity soon made him president of the Teamsters Detroit chapter. After rising to the office of vice president of the entire union in 1952, Hoffa was elected president in 1957, where his backdoor deals and visible ties to organized crime made him the subject of multiple federal and state investigations into his activities. Managing to evade prosecution, in 1964, Hoffa scored a decisive victory when he brought nearly every trucker in North America under one unified Teamsters contract. Hoffa made numerous enemies during his rise and ascension to Teamsters president, including both the FBI and U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the latter indicting Hoffa multiple times before the Justice Department finally landed a successful conviction against Hoffa in March of 1964, when he was found guilty of bribery, jury tampering, and a later charge of misusing funds from the Teamsters pension plan. He was sentenced in 1967 to 13 years in prison. However, President Richard M. Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence in 1971, at the same time banning the labor leader from holding office within the Teamsters until 1980. But perhaps Hoffa's greatest legacy occurred in the summer of 1975, when Hoffa left his Detroit home for a reconciliation meeting at a Bloomfield Township restaurant between Hoffa, a mob-connected union boss from New Jersey, and a local crime figure from the greater Detroit area. According to communications with family members, Hoffa was the only one to show up for the meeting, making a final phone call to his son at 2:30 in the afternoon of July 30th, before disappearing without a trace. While his car was found in the restaurant's parking lot, his disappearance has sparked years of speculation regarding who killed Jimmy Hoffa, as well as decades of false leads regarding his final resting place. He was officially declared deceased in 1982, making the life and disappearance of James Riddle Hoffa a shady glimpse into the dark world of organized crime and unionized corruption.